The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. There is a silent tragedy in the modern world. Countless souls living lives that do not belong to them. They wake each morning beneath the weight of expectations. Family, society, culture, even their younger selves. They wear masks not of authenticity, but of approval. Today I am here to tell you, you've been living someone else's life. And it is time to come home to your own. You were not born to perform. You were not born to be a mirror reflecting what others want to see. And yet, somewhere along the journey, you began to trade pieces of your authenticity for acceptance, your uniqueness for safety, your soul for survival. This is the origin of the false self. The mask you wear to be loved, to be praised, to belong. But masks, no matter how beautifully crafted, are still cages. You see, approval is addictive, it's seductive. From a young age, we are taught, explicitly and implicitly, that love is conditional, that being quiet when you want to speak, smiling when you want to cry, and succeeding in ways that impress others is what earns you worth. Over time, the applause becomes louder than your own intuition. You learn to play the role well. You become what others expect you to be, even if it suffocates your spirit. But here is the truth Jung knew so well: the persona, the social mask, is not inherently wrong. We all need it to function in society. But when you start to believe that the mask is who you are, you begin to lose yourself. You begin to live not as a soul with a voice, but as an echo of someone else's desires. You follow paths that lead to achievement, but not fulfillment. You reach milestones that impress others, but feel hollow to you. You wake up every day with a nagging emptiness, and you don't know why. Because on the surface, everything looks perfect. This is the tragedy of the false self. It can earn you applause, but it will never bring you peace. It can give you status, but it will rob you of purpose. It can win approval, but it will never let you rest. Because deep down, something inside you always knows. You're not being true. You're not being whole. You're not being you. And the longer you wear this mask, the heavier it becomes. It begins to harden into a personality that feels like prison. And eventually, you forget who you were before the world told you who to be. But even in the darkest parts of the false self, a light remains. It flickers in your discomfort. It whispers in your dissatisfaction. It calls out to you in quiet moments, when the crowd is gone and the applause fades, and asks a simple question: whose life are you really living? This is not condemnation, it is a calling. A call to take off the mask, to risk being misunderstood in order to be real, to value inner alignment over outer approval, to stop performing and start living. You were not meant to be a prisoner of praise. You were meant to be a creator of your own becoming. You were not meant to wear a mask. You were meant to wear your soul on your face. Approval is fleeting, but authenticity, that is eternal. There comes a moment, often in silence, when you feel it, a soft discomfort, a quiet ache, a sense that something is missing. Nothing dramatic, no thunder or lightning, just a whisper, a gentle, persistent nudge from within. This is the voice of the soul, subtle and elusive, yet always present. The soul doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It waits. It waits patiently for you to stop moving long enough to hear it. But in our modern world, silence is rare and stillness is feared. We drown in noise, notifications, obligations, distractions, and call it productivity. We chase success, approval, relationships, and entertainment, all in the name of fulfillment, yet we remain strangely unfulfilled. And beneath the noise, the soul still speaks. Always. It speaks through longing, through restlessness, through the quiet moments when you realize that what you've built, what you've achieved, doesn't feel quite right. It should feel good, but it doesn't. That is not failure, that is feedback. The soul speaks in symbols, in dreams, and intuition. It doesn't always use words. Sometimes, it speaks through your body. Fatigue that makes no sense, anxiety with no clear cause. Sometimes it speaks through emotion, tears you didn't expect, anger you try to suppress, joy that feels misplaced. Sometimes it simply whispers, "This isn't it." And yet, most people ignore these whispers. They rationalize them, medicate them, distract themselves from them. Why? Because the soul doesn't always lead you where it's comfortable. It leads you where it's true. And the truth, especially if you've been living someone else's life, can feel like a threat. But the longer you ignore the whisper, the louder your suffering becomes. What begins as unease turns into numbness. What starts as quiet misalignment grows into full-blown crisis. Life will keep sending signals, subtle at first, then louder, until you listen. not to punish you, but to redirect you. Because the soul doesn't give up on you, even when you've given up on yourself. To listen to your soul is to invite truth. It's to become still enough to hear what you've been avoiding. It's to sit with the discomfort rather than fleeing from it. It's to honor your dreams, even when they're inconvenient. It's to trust your inner compass, even when the world tells you to go another way. And this kind of listening, it's not passive, it's an act of courage. It requires turning inward even when outwardly things look fine. It demands you ask the hard questions: am I truly happy? Is this really my path? What do I want? Not what I should want. And most importantly, who am I when no one is watching? This is the beginning of awakening, not in grand gestures or dramatic shifts, but in the quiet decision to trust yourself again. To believe that the voice inside you knows the way. To remember that you are not just a role, a label, a function. You are a soul, and your soul has a purpose. But you must listen. You must turn down the volume of the world to hear the wisdom within. And when you do, when you really listen, you will hear something beautiful. Not chaos, not confusion, but clarity, peace, truth. And in that truth you will begin to come alive again. There are parts of yourself you have buried, consciously or not. Desires you were told were wrong. Anger you were shamed for feeling. Dreams that were dismissed as unrealistic. Traits you disowned to survive in a world that demanded your conformity. These parts didn't disappear. They were exiled, relegated to the unconscious. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow. Not evil, not broken, but simply unacknowledged. And until you turn toward your shadow, it will shape your life from the dark. Most people live in fear of their shadow. They see it as a threat, as something shameful or dangerous. But in truth, your shadow is not your enemy. It is your unlived life. It contains the raw material of your power, your passion, your truth. When you suppress it, you don't become good. You become divided. You wear a smile while seething inside. You achieve outward success while feeling hollow. You say yes when your whole being screams no. You become split, polished on the outside, but fractured within. And here's the paradox: the life you avoid, the parts you pretend not to feel, the dreams you've labeled impossible, the truths you're afraid to admit, is often exactly the life you need. Because what you've repressed didn't die. It waits for your courage. It waits for your honesty. It waits for you to finally say, I will not abandon myself anymore. A shadow work is not about fixing yourself. It is about facing yourself. It is about looking into the mirror without turning away. It is asking, what parts of me have I disowned to be accepted? What am I afraid will happen if I show the real me? Who might I become if I allowed of me to exist? To do this work is not easy. It requires radical honesty. It demands humility. It invites discomfort. But the reward is freedom. Because once you begin to integrate the shadow, you stop being haunted by it. You stop projecting it onto others. You reclaim energy you didn't know you had. Because repression is exhausting. You discover hidden talents, creative fire, and emotional depth that had been buried beneath guilt and fear. And most importantly, you become whole. Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You cannot find peace by pretending the darkness isn't there. You find peace by meeting it, learning from it, integrating it into your being. That is the essence of shadow work. Not becoming someone new, but recovering who you were before you learned to hide. The anger you suppress may contain your voice. The fear you run from may be guarding your courage. The jealousy you feel may point to a desire you've denied. Every shadow has a gift, if you're willing to receive it. So stop running. Stop pretending. Turn toward the very parts of yourself you were taught to fear. In that darkness you will find the light you've been searching for. In that fear, you will find your power. In the shadow, you will find the map back to your true self. Because the life you avoid isn't your enemy. It is your initiation. There is a journey that every soul is called to take. A journey not across mountains or oceans, but inward, into the very depths of who you are. It is not marked by fame or recognition, but by the quiet, powerful unfolding of your true self. Carl Jung called this process individuation. The path of becoming whole, of becoming you. Not the version of you shaped by expectation, by fear, by social roles, but the you that has always lived beneath it all, waiting to be reclaimed. Individuation is the hero's journey, but it begins not in triumph, but in discontent. You feel it as a restlessness, a gnawing sense that something is missing, that the life you're living, no matter how polished or praised, doesn't feel real. That is the first call, the soul stirring, reminding you that you are more than what you've become. The world tells you who to be. From birth, you are handed labels, roles, and ideals. You're taught to be good, successful, agreeable, practical, rarely to be whole. And so you construct a life around those ideals. You build a persona that earns approval, respect, and even love. But eventually, something breaks through the surface, a dream, a breakdown, a quiet crisis of meaning, and it brings with it a terrifying truth. You've been living a life that's not your own. That is when the journey begins. Not with a map, but with a question: who am I, really? Individuation is not about becoming better in the eyes of the world. It's about becoming truer in the eyes of the soul. It means unraveling what you've been taught so you can remember what you already know. It means confronting the shadow, making peace with the past, and allowing your unique essence to emerge, not in rebellion, but in revelation. This process isn't linear, it's cyclical, messy, and deeply human. There will be times when you feel lost, because you are shedding an identity that once gave you meaning. There will be loneliness, because few dare to walk this path. But with each step, you reclaim parts of yourself that were silenced. With each choice toward authenticity, you breathe life back into your spirit. The world may not understand your journey. It's not supposed to. Individuation is not for the masses. It is for the brave. It's not about separating from the world, but about returning to it whole. Because when you know who you are truly and deeply, you no longer move through life seeking validation. You become a source of truth, of light, of meaning. You begin to create not out of duty, but out of inspiration. You begin to love not to complete yourself, but to expand yourself. You begin to lead not to control, but to guide others toward their own truth. And so, individuation becomes the foundation of all that matters. Your work becomes art. Your relationships become sacred. Your choices become aligned. And you once fragmented become unified. Not perfect, not always certain, but real. This is the hero's journey within, not toward becoming something else, but toward becoming fully, unapologetically, undeniably you. It is the most courageous path you will ever walk, and it is the only one that leads you home. There comes a time when the life you've built, carefully, cautiously, perhaps even successfully, begins to feel too small. Not because it was worthless or meaningless, but because you've outgrown it. The ambitions that once drove you no longer inspire. The roles you've played begin to chafe against your skin. The identity you once clung to starts to crumble, not out of failure, but because something deeper is stirring. This is the threshold of rebirth. But rebirth is not a gentle transformation. It is a death, not a physical one, but a psychological and spiritual one. The death of who you thought you were. And that death is painful because it requires surrendering all that made you feel safe, seen, and certain. You must let go of the image you curated, the rules you followed, the story you told yourself about who you are and what your life is supposed to be. Carl Jung knew this deeply. He taught that growth requires destruction, not of your value but of your illusion. To be reborn is not to discard your past, but to burn away the parts of it that no longer serve your becoming. It is to shed the skin of your old self, just as the snake must, not out of punishment, but necessity. The self must die again and again, so the soul can rise. This process is terrifying, because it leads you into the unknown. The old you knew how to perform, how to please, how to survive. The new you, raw, real, emerging, is untested, vulnerable, uncertain. In this liminal space you feel like you're floating between lives. You're no longer who you were, but not yet who you are becoming. This is the dark night of the soul, the sacred in-between where the ego unravels and the soul begins to take root. And yet, this death is sacred. Because only in letting go of the false can the truth emerge. Only in releasing who you think you're supposed to be can you become who you truly are. The caterpillar must dissolve into nothingness before it becomes a butterfly. In the same way, your ego must surrender before your essence can rise. What must die? The need for constant approval. The addiction to perfection. The belief that you are not enough unless you are achieving. The stories that say you must shrink to be loved. The patterns that keep you trapped in cycles of self-abandonment. These are the graves you must dig. Not to bury yourself, but to bury the lies. And in this funeral of the false self, something extraordinary happens. The real you begins to awaken. You start to feel alive not because life is easier, but because it is finally yours. You make choices not from fear but from truth. You speak not to impress but to connect. You live not to be seen but to see clearly. This is rebirth, not a new identity, but the emergence of your original self, untamed, unmasked, and fully alive. You realize that your pain was not punishment, it was purification. Your breakdown was not the end, it was initiation. So let the old you die, let it fall away like autumn leaves. Let go of the stories, the masks, the fear. What is real cannot be lost. What is false was never yours to keep. In that sacred emptiness, in that brave surrender, you will not find ruin. You will find rebirth, and in that rebirth, you will finally meet the self you were always meant to be. The world does not need another person living out of fear, conformity, or imitation. The world needs you, the raw, real, radiant you. You've been living someone else's life. But now, the path is clear. Return to yourself. Reclaim your soul. Walk the road of individuation, not because it is easy, but because it is the only way to truly live. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. Carl Jung.